Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to Succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 162. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Owen Marcus. Owen's journey into emotional wellness and the founding of his company began unexpectedly in 1995 when he started his first men's group. This path led him to write a book, appear in a documentary, and launch both a nonprofit and initiatives like Everyman and now Men's Emotional Leadership Development, MELD. These ventures are dedicated to helping men pursue personal growth through science-backed, community-oriented practice. Owen, so glad to have you on the show today.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you got here, whatever the bio didn't cover.
I got here, which is now primarily working with men because I needed to work with myself. And short story is that I've done a lot of other work in the wellness community in terms of healing some things that other people would think would be impossible to heal, but also having an integrated medical clinic down in Scottsdale. And I realized that my relationships, primarily with women, were not bad, but they weren't good. And I also realized I was a consistent variable. So I dove into something I was resisting, which was starting a men's group and being a part of a men's group. And one thing led to another. And then 20 years ago, I did another men's group when I was up in North Idaho, and changed the model. And that model was really based on what I learned many years earlier and was using in my clinic, which is a model that's based on the emotional physiology of what it is to be a human, which means how do we take the stress or trauma response and have it work for us? And I found great success working with men, and that success has generalized into working with men primarily, but also women and the business community, where one of our clients was Google.
Okay. So when you say a men's group, just for the purpose of definition clarification, what is that? What does that look like? What is your focus?
Men's groups have been around for quite a few years. We're now seeing a resurgence of them. So essentially, it's just a group of men getting together. First, it was live, and now a lot of it's virtual, in a space where it's anywhere from 2 hours to 4 hours, usually once a week. And generally, they're peer-to-peer. And first, they're an emotionally safe place, and there might be, some basic agreements like confidentiality. And then there might be some skills or principles or techniques that these guys use to, in the case of our work, to take a man deeper into his experience, but really facilitate that man and sharing what he normally wouldn't share to become more connected to his emotions. And often we're doing it through getting him connected to his somatic experience, his body experience. And out of that, really, when we get connected to our emotions, connected to other people, and most guys initially come because, they want to improve their relationship at home. And that usually happens within 6 months. But then they start to see benefits across the board. And a lot of our guys are entrepreneurs, and they start to see how their businesses are not only more successful, but just a lot more fun to run.
Interesting. So they're coming to you largely with a self-awareness about the deficits, if you will, in their relationships at home, first and foremost. Okay. And so let's talk about that a little bit, not because I want to dive too much specifically into that area of work. This is more of a generalist podcast, if you will, as it relates to leadership at all. But relationships are everywhere, right? We all need to be effective in our relationships if we're going to be successful, if we're going to be happy. What would you say are some of the underlying issues that the men or women that you interact with are struggling with? And how would you, because you already offered this, so it makes it even easier for me, how would you sort of bridge that issue, that dynamic into the workplace and sort of say, as a result of these kinds of dynamics, it might be difficult for a leader and their direct report or for members of a team to interact for reasons X, Y, Z?
Well, I think a successful company or team inevitably or eventually feel connected. And I think we all know, and the research supports that emotional safety or psychological safety, which has now become a popular phenomena, is critical. And to create that safety, a leader needs to model it him or herself. Now, to model that emotional safety, they need to first create it for themselves, which means, if I'm that leader, I need to first know what I'm feeling, somatically, but particularly emotionally. And I have to be able to be willing to show that autonomically or non-verbally, and we do that innately, and there's a lot of research that explains how that happens. But also, we particularly need to show it with our behaviors in terms of, creating this emotional safe space where people feel okay being themselves, which means that they're more likely to lean in with a novel suggestion or take risks, because we know if we're going to be successful in business, we got to take risks, and people need to feel okay about proposing a risk. And the leader is the one that sets the tone for that. So he or she needs to be able to do that. And we found that to be good at that and to be sort of natural at it, they first need to be connected to what they're feeling.
Interesting. So how do you convince people, or what message would you have for those who are listening and not necessarily working with you, to become more risk tolerant as opposed to risk averse? Because I think by definition, maybe not as children, but certainly as we grow up, we become more and more risk averse. We're afraid of negative feedback. We're afraid of the consequences of taking risks. And as a leader, potentially you have a lot to lose if you open yourself up too much, if you're maybe doing things the wrong way. So any advice for leaders on that regard?
Um, we all know as leaders, we're going to screw up. And we're going to make mistakes across the board. So it's being okay with making mistakes, which allows us to be more risk averse. And we need to not only take the risk, but sort of own our mistakes and own the consequences of mistakes. And I would encourage, owning some of that emotional stuff. It doesn't have to be, and I certainly recommend that your leadership team is not a group therapy or even a men's group. But when I work with leaders, and I do work with a lot of different leaders, and again, generally men, in many different situations, when they learn, that it's okay to feel something and okay to reveal a vulnerable experience. It might just be one sentence like, "Oh, I suggested that we buy this product to use it in this scenario, and it's looking like it's not working. It's, that mistake's on me. I own it." And right there, some simple admission like that, which is something we all don't want to do. And I think more so men, because we're so trained to be performance oriented, sends the signal out to everyone, oh, it's okay to take a risk. It's okay to admit to mistakes, and I will not be fired or shamed if I make mistakes. And yeah, there is a consequence, but the consequence is not a consequence of shaming, but just a consequence. Oh, we made a mistake. We'll deal with it and we'll move on.
Hmm. Okay, so I want to go a little bit deeper in the area of men's mental health. I do think that my sense is that men, just because fundamentally are typically wired very differently than women, and are maybe less emotionally connected in the first place, that the whole idea of confronting one's emotions, of dealing with one's emotions, may feel a little bit more foreign. At the same time, I think society recently, for sure, has from everything I'm seeing and hearing, has has in a way pushed men away, or pushed men back, in the sense that women empowerment and certain other areas, as if, or the patriarchy, if you're going to use certain language. I'm curious to know, with the men that you work with, how much do you feel is nature? How much of you do you feel is nurture? We'll start with that. And then what I'd like to talk about is a little bit more specifically about the areas where men tend to suffer the most. And you might have people walking amongst you or walking with you, so to speak, on a daily basis, interacting with you, seemingly normal, but hollow and broken inside, and just putting on a good show. So I know they're two different areas of the same question, so I don't want to blend them and confuse them. Let's take it one by one. But I do ultimately want to go there because I feel like whether you are the leader feeling it yourself, or
Mhm.
whether you lead others, man or woman, leading anyone, but leading men in particular, maybe what are some of the telltale signs? So I guess nature versus nurture first, and then we can go back to this other one afterwards.
Um, yeah, the more I've done this work, the more I read the research, the more I think it's nature. We have different chromosomes or chromosomes, but I really think that it's more how we're trained in this culture. Uh,
So,
and
so
yes,
nurture, you mean?
yeah, it's how we're trained, and you can look and you can say some of it's epigenetics, which is sort of the interface between nature and nurture. And one way I look at it and explain it is, we go back to our ancestors who were in tribes. Generally speaking, the women were the gatherers, the men were the hunters. And we got out on hunting parties and we were more assertive and all that. And we innately have a certain quality of provide and protect. So I think that's, maybe some of the nature, but particularly these days, a lot of it's culture. And one of the things that I've seen is particularly, couple hundred years ago when we moved into the Industrial Revolution and men had to go to work and they left home, women stepped up because they needed to, and they've done a great job. They were, 3 months of sole parent, they were the teachers, and on from there. And so the consequence of that, it's a natural consequence. What it is to be a man emotionally sort of skewed towards the feminine. And we see that particularly being different is in relationships, at home with your partner, but also at work. And what's happened is men are sort of confused, and we don't often think about it, and we don't often talk about this, is how do I show up in a masculine way that is genuine and authentic for me and maybe my gender, and also supportive for women and others. And we don't really have a model of that because we haven't seen a model and the model hasn't been taught. What we do find is when men come together in our trainings or our groups, we sort of co-create that model, even though maybe no one's been taught that model, but it's like instinctually, some part of us knows how to show up in an emotional way as a man. And like one of the distinctive qualities that is more prevalent for men is this quality called assertive vulnerability. And so women sort of teach us how to be vulnerable. And that mindset or that paradigm is a lot of that's based on vulnerability, which I think is great. But we get confused as a guy because we get sort of that continuum of the hypo-masculine, which is sort of the maybe more sensitive kind of guy, and the hyper-masculine, which is the more macho man that's maybe an extreme misogynistic and all that. And it's like, where are we? And its essence, I think, you know, we need to be vulnerable as men, but we need to do it as a man. And one of the ways that we do it is as we're feeling vulnerable, we're assertive. And that could be, for example, like my little example, I made a mistake. I own my mistake. And, and this is, I feel embarrassed by it and I'm going to move on. And so when a guy can be emotional as a man, he's not sitting down, lying down, crying and collapsing. He's literally and metaphorically sort of standing up in his vulnerability and often taking action with it as he feels his vulnerable experience, which is a model that we often don't see as men. And also, I would say it's a model of what it is to, be a leader today.
Hmm. So then let's transfer. Maybe maybe you addressed it in part, but I'd like to,
Yeah.
I guess, unpack it a little bit more. So if I'm walking around and I'm feeling, I know you deal with depression, for example, amongst other attributes. If I'm walking around and I'm feeling less than whole as a leader, or I want to be the best leader I can and sort of be attuned to people around me that are showing up and putting on a good game face, but are struggling. Obviously, you're not their therapist, but I guess my question is, what advice could you give? What are some ideas that will help people um, to engage in that restorative process, either for themselves or to support others?
Well, I think you just said it. We need support. And we can have a supportive environment at work, but work is not and should not be therapy. So just like I think, and I was just saying this to a client of mine, that as men, we need, and probably women too, support outside our family. So in a tribal situation, we sort of had that support, the hunting party for men, for example. So we need a place where we don't have to perform like at work or even in some ways at home, where we can just be ourselves. So we need support. Now, what's happening over the years is men are much more willing now to go seek therapy than they ever were before, which is, I think, is a good thing. But more and more men are saying, well, I mean, maybe I don't need therapy. I just need a place where I can just show up and receive and give support. And, I've done work with EO, the not emotional, entrepreneurial organization. And a lot of that, for example, is not just, the business support, but it ends up being the emotional support because we can't get it and we can't expect to get it from our company or employees. And if you're trying to, your company's going to fail. But that's a valid need and we need to have a place for it. And one of my focuses is that we also need communal support. And there's a great power in being in a group like our men's group or someplace where you're with your peers, and maybe not in a general sense like your colleagues, but you're with other guys or your peers, and you're receiving and giving support, which is hugely nourishing and way more nourishing than I ever expected. And we got guys in this group I started 20 years ago that are still in it. And, they're 19 years out from needing what they joined a group for, but they're still in it because it gives them the support that they continue to need throughout their whole life, in their relationships and running their business.
So let's ask, I'm going to ask a question that, neither of us, neither of us would be confused for Gen Zers or younger. But there are many people out there, especially the younger part of the workforce today, that grew up with, some kind of device in their pockets, really have spent a lot of their time socializing online. I know you do virtual groups as well as in person, and I know that there's a difference even between those two. But moving from that format where it's still human beings showing up visually in a synchronous as opposed to an asynchronous conversation, how do you feel? What do you feel are the effects? I'm not sure how much of a social media user you are, but what do you feel are the effects of trying to get support, relationships, advice, and all of that in a social media context where the people who are quote unquote showing up, unless you're in a specifically, contained community, are in and out kind of type of thing where it's not the same people all the time and the opportunity to relate is different and perhaps more superficial, etc. What is your advice for people who seem to seek their support, their confirmation, if you will, from an online community as opposed to something that we were describing before?
That's a good question. Bluntly, I think that's like junk food. Uh, I call it junk connection. We need to be fed. And often when we're hungry or in crisis or whatever, we reach for junk food. And we know it's not nourishing, but it's short-term satisfying. And I think that's the same thing that we often see with social media. I mean, there's other things about social media, and some are positive, but we're hungry for connection. It's a human need that we have. We have a need for connection. And because it's readily available, we can, as you say, go in and out. Society is sort of pushing us that way. The logarithms push us that way. And we get the dopamine rush, all that. And so it feeds us, but doesn't nourish us. And what I found is when we have that synchronized connection, when we have ongoing connection, as you're saying, it could be a virtual group where, you're developing rapport, you're developing trust, developing these communal connections. And, you start to have a group, you start to develop relationships and trust and a good kind of dependency and support that we all benefit because that's a need that we have, but it takes an investment, it takes risk, it takes commitment. And we're such a ephemeral society where we want everything to be immediate. But I do see it changing. I just an hour ago read a Fast Company article about Gen Zers, and and how it was why were these Gen Z men voting for Trump, and it sort of touches on this. They they feel disconnected, and in their view, they felt like Trump in some way was connecting to him, in part, as this article said, because he was getting on podcasts that these guys were listening to. So they started to develop a relationship, even though it was a passive relationship. It was more than just, a TikTok video.
Hmm, interesting. So, what do you say to the Simon Garfunkels, Simon and Garfunkel, excuse me, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkels, and anyone else who says, I am a rock, I'm an island. I don't really need people. I'm doing my thing. I'm macho, so to speak. You could have introverts, myself included, who don't necessarily feel a need to have a very large social community in order to feel fed. But that's not what I'm referring to here. Those individuals who say, I'm doing just fine as it is, and they put on this veneer. Do you buy it? Number one. And number two, if you don't, how do you help them break down those, what I'm assuming would be protections or some kind of guardrails that they put on for themselves, perhaps because of something that happened earlier in life?
Well, I'm an introvert too. And we get a lot of introverts, probably more introverts than extroverts in our groups and trainings and all. Um, and we all have masks, as you mentioned. And in my view, this is what I say to people, is look, we all had stress, maybe trauma as a child. And we did the best job we could to survive that. And part of what we did was we created survival coping mechanisms, and they become mass, and they worked. We survived. I said, look, it worked. You survived. Great. The problem is, yes, a lot of them have an upside, but they also have a downside. And the downside gets into what we're talking about, the more authentic, supportive relationships. And so, and I do some co-ed stuff, and often in the beginning, we'll do some kind of exercise where everyone at their level reveals a hidden phenomena. It's like one of the first things we'll say, and we'll do like what we call AB lines, and you'll just talk to one person, and the prompt will be, "What I don't want to tell you." And so, we might be facing each other in one of these trainings, and I'll go and I don't want to tell you that I'm scared about speaking, uh, whatever. And then you're just standing there listening for a minute or two, and then you talk to me about that. And then we rotate, and you start to tell other guys one to one. And then it's like we all have masks. We need those masks. And so it's not a matter of getting rid of them. It's not being attached to them and developing these ability when appropriate to step beyond our mask and start to have these authentic connections.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you one last question prior to the final question of the segment. Because this is a leadership podcast, yes, we've talked a lot about, let's call it, personal challenges and self-awareness and a lot of the mental health concerns, specifically amongst men. If I'm a leader of other men, on the one hand, I want to be strong for them,
Mhm.
but I want to put up that sense of I got this. And on the other hand, I know you talked about it before, you own it and you move on. On the other hand, you want to have a human side to you. What kind of balance would you suggest there? Is there anything in particular that you've seen or heard that seems to work better on the whole? Obviously, every individual is unique, but on the aggregate, if I'm looking for some kind of model to work with.
Well, I think what as a few, one I would say is we all need support. And so just like a therapist should not be getting support from his client, a boss is more there to give support and mentor and direct and hold accountable and all the other things. And you can do it in an authentic, vulnerable way. But I would suggest that that man or that woman has a place, be a coach, a therapist, a group, or some place that serves him or her in support. So he's or she's, renewed and has that, so that person can bring it back to work and not be burnt out and really be there for his or her employees and give that support because it's hard to keep giving when you're not receiving. And this is one of the things I have to work with a lot of these guys is because we're all high achievers. We've been trained to perform, and we often put ourselves very low on the protocol. I saw that when I had my clinic. I've had a lot of docs and dentists as clients and friends, and they all say the same thing. Guys are the last to come in. They often come in sometimes when it's too late or after they've suffered a long time. So particularly for men, we got to get real. We got to sort of grow up around. We need support. We need to take care of ourselves for ourselves, but also for the impact it has on our family and at work. I had another client I was working with last night, and he owns a business, and he's amazed within a course of a month how he's feeling better, and how because he's feeling better, he has more energy. He's there for his employees more than he's ever been. And within a course of a month, his business has turned around. He just said his business is the most successful it's been in 26 years. And he
Nice.
came to me not wanting to work on his business, but working on wanting to work on his relationship. But he got into it and it quickly transferred into his business, and he's showing up in business differently.
Nice. Okay, so here's the last question. I ask it all of my visitors, all my guests. What is the biggest mistake, Owen, that you've made that has positioned you for greater success?
Um, Not trusting my brilliance, which is really, I grew up with dyslexia and Asperger's and a few other related things. And in the beginning, sort of buying it as a disability and not buying those challenges as unique opportunities and gifts. And so I would say that we all have them, but we hide them rather than use them.
Okay, are you ready for rapid fire?
Go for it.
Okay, short and sweet. What's your favorite place to visit?
Uh, the ocean.
Okay, I was about to ask you, beach or mountains?
The beach. I love mountains too.
What's your go-to comfort food?
A good stew.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
What's your favorite season of the year?
Spring.
Your hidden talent?
Compassion.
One thing that's always lifted your spirits?
Nature.
Favorite way to recharge after a long day?
Hot tub.
The best piece of advice you've ever received?
Be yourself.
And a productivity tip that helps you to get more done?
Sleep.
I love it. Okay. How can people connect with you, learn more about you?
Um, our company is meld.community. It's MELD dot community spelled out. You can reach me there. You're welcome to write to me, Owen at meld.community. We're on social, and I have my own website, owenmarcus.com, but meld.community is the best place. It's for men. We have a newsletter that women subscribe to. We have a free membership for men. And, my goal is to, help men in any way we can.
Okay. So with everything you've shared, please leave us with one final life lesson.
Um, yeah, I would go with what you were saying before of have the courage to occasionally take off your mask and see what that does for you and what it really does for others. In other words, be vulnerable and really reveal something that you normally wouldn't reveal.
Okay. Let's do that. I think all of us would benefit. It's been a pleasure, Owen. Thank you for going to a place where I think we need to go from time to time, minimally, and for raising awareness around an important issue. And I'm sure all of the men who you have the opportunity to interact with benefit much from your experience and from your facilitation and support. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing, and wishing you much continued success with everything you do.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.